All right, done. All right, go ahead.
Here we go. Let's have fun and don't care if we swear. Oh. Hi there, I'm Dani, spiritual therapist, and today I cannot wait to bring you this intellectual genius, the very right Reverend Dr. Chris Lemmon, who has been a mentor of mine for over 20 years. Dr. Chris, welcome, sir.
Well, thank you very much. This is fun. I get a little vacation in the middle of winter by talking to you and seeing the countryside in the back, so it's kind of fun.
Thank you so much. So, Chris, I know that you care not for labels, you care not for titles. You're one of the most outspoken people I've ever met in my life, which is really a good fit for me, as you know, you've known me this long. And, you know, I wanted to bring you on because there's such a range of personalities and stories and educations and emissaries on my little channel. And there's a place for a really great, expansive mind. And to me, you really do fit that. One of the things that you've been focusing your work on this year is the subject of range. And we were just talking, we weren't even planning to record right this second, but the topic was so good. I'm like, let's just record. So I would love you to share what you were sharing with me about the movies and what range means for people so we can help them to open up.
Well, what we were talking about was that I just noticed I have not gone to the movies for quite a little while. And, you know, the title that I hold sacred right now is retired, but I'm still doing the passionate stuff, but just, you know, I don't have to show up 9 to 5 somewhere. So anyway, that was kind of nice. I've got a lot of free time and we've just gone through some things in life and we were sitting around because it's rainy, it's wintertime here. And so we were looking at some current movies out on Netflix because I don't own a TV. I've never owned one in my life. So it's just been on a computer. And because my wife is a musician, she actually kind of likes more the scores of the movies than the actual content. But we were looking at some local movies and we picked them because they had actors that have been around for as long as I have been around. So they, you know, accomplished. And we were looking at the movies and it's just, I was really intrigued at how much they're short and in pieces. The actors don't put any emotions into them. They're standing there, they're looking around at people, they're talking away from people. It's all about reaction. It's all about reaction. It's all violence or extreme or somebody tried to justify something. And this is very, to me, very reminiscent of what I remember when I was a kid growing up, because I was born post World War II. So at the time, what was really popular was a lot of military movies, a lot of because the soldiers, I guess, coming back could relate to those experiences. And so there was a lot of that, we're going to get them, you know, we're going to stand up for them. We're going to craziness. It's like, wow, you know, you guys, we got to sit down and talk. We got to quit arguing about stuff. My gosh, because we're never going to find equal ground when you're in a priority. So when you're polarized, it means you're sitting at the very edge of a range. Your back is to the wall and you're there and you're defending because there's nowhere to go. You're just against the wall. It's a defense position, which is where you're at in a war, where you're at in any conflict. But we've been on this planet and all long enough now, quite a few thousand years, that we should be growing up. We should be starting to understand when our back's to the wall, we need to step away from the wall. We need to have ability to move a little bit. We need to be able to have conversations. We need to be able to interact with people. To do that, we need to build some ranges, but the ranges that we normally feel comfortable in, the ones that we lived in, whether it's a church that you join, a religious organization, or some type of ideology, or some type of a mystical study, or some type of political thing, or heavens, I see all these guys running around with jerseys on from sports teams. It's like, okay, well, whatever, that's most certainly a range that you're passionate in. But because you're passionate in that, we're also addictive into patterns. So it means we have our stand in those positions. And changing that is not easy. We know today from medical science that if somebody goes to a doctor and the doctor says you have to change your diet or you're going to die, less than 3% will do that. That's how ornery we are with our pattern. So the only choice is to develop new ranges. New ranges means read a new book, not something in your topic, read something. I'm just got done reading a book on finances, which I don't know anything about, obviously. I have been reading tons of books. I just bought 3 new books on prime numbers and mathematics. It's like, you see, opening those ranges, I don't have a bias. I don't have a place I stand. I can look into that and enjoy it. You can, if you don't normally go to enjoy a new type of food, go to someplace different as a restaurant now that they're opening up, or we can go to movies again. We can see something totally different or something with some significance outside of our context. Normally, when I went into what's called retirement, I started traveling the world because to me, when I was working, at least my side job, and that is a teacher, why I would take people on a trip every year, and we'd go to places like Costa Rica. I would take a group down there. We'd go to different places so you could get steeped, not in just the culture and the people. You get to talk to the local people. You find out that they're just real people. You get to go to their house for dinner. You get to go visit them. So those are the things in a range of experience that we find that our humanness comes out. And when we're combatant, I mean, right now would be not a good time to go on vacation in some parts of the world, obviously, right? So you start to see that's the whole nature of it is like, wow, where can we find a place we can open? I mean, it's just like Costa Rica was a beautiful place. I've been down there several times, you know, I've been to Thailand several times. I've been to China several times, you know, it has a lot more structure than America does, but most certainly the people are very warm and real. And that's what I find everywhere. It's just like, wow, you can relate to people. You can, you know, I can remember I was sitting in Cambodia and watching a woman in a hotel, and she was playing a musical instrument, and we were just enjoying it. And then I saw a bunch of people, not Americans, from another country. I won't even say which one, but they came over and they were being obnoxious with her, kind of like what I've seen Americans do down through the years traveling. You know, they were touching her instrument while she's playing. They were doing this, that, and the other. And she had a smile on, was kind of, you know, doing due diligence and trying to be nice. And then when they were all done being a nuisance to her and talking over her music and everything, they left, you know, a whole stack of money and then walked away. And I thought, wow, that was so traditional Americans in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. It's like, wow, that's kind of interesting, right? So maybe we are growing up. Maybe we are changing a little bit. And I think that's kind of great. I went over and I complimented her on the music, and we stood there listening, and she smiled, and then when she was all done playing, there was a little tear on her eye. And I said, so I just came over we're not going to throw a lot of money at you. Someone else has already done. I just came over to say thank you, and we appreciate that. Yeah. And that was a little tear came down. I say that's an opening up, and I think that's really important. And that's why I want to open up more ranges. Right? Does that make sense?
It does, and there's so many ways to go. And you know what you shared there was you could look at that from a different perspective too. So me as the listener to the story that you were in and observing of these buffoons messing around with this woman, but they tipped her. So what is that payoff? What is that exchange? That they could mess with her stuff, but pay, you know, which is kind of what is happening in the world at large. Right. And yet you're sitting there with a beautiful musical refinement internally, you and your wife, who's an amazing musician. And then you were there and you paid respects to her as the person and then still tipped her. But, you know, it's so interesting to look at that. You know, what was happening inside that woman? Was she so beaten down because she had to sit there and tolerate that? Because she's not going to eat, neither of her family that night. Like, what was her range? Maybe right. She wanted to pick her instrument up and whack her around the head and say, fuck off. You know what right. I mean? It's just so, but it takes something like that for somebody to then expand in their range, doesn't it?
Right.
I know that like you and I are really, you know, we love to tell stories, and I just want to say a couple of things about you guys. I have to tell you, this man here, I'm so excited. I'm so excited that he said yes to me, even though we're friends and he's been my mentor for over 20 years. He still didn't have to agree to come on my channel, and I'm so glad you did, Dr. Chris. You have said about range, and when I was studying with you, and I've met many times on many different broadcasts on my channel, I've mentioned that I studied, you know, for 4 years in a metaphysical school, which was yours. And the classes, the way that you designed the classes were mind busting. I mean, I've never experienced any, that's why I stayed with you for 4 years, training like once or twice a week in different modalities. But there were so many things you did. And you know, a lot of us have had a lot of, you know, violence and trauma in our childhoods. And one of the, I think it was a 2-year course, it was ministers. So I became an ordained minister under your tutorage during that 2-year period. The levels of psychology that you took us into was just absolutely astounding. And you led us gently into arenas like we had to blow up a balloon and draw a face on the balloon of the person that we perceived as harming us the most. And then when we did that, I remember, I just remember something. I remember these classes were huge, like 30, 40 people. We had to go around the room and say something nice. And when it got to me, you said, Dani, and I said, bitch, to the balloon, you know. I'm like, and that's really nice, you know. It was just so amazing how you would literally take the temperature energetically of everybody, because you're so incredibly clairvoyant and clairsentient and or whatever else. I know you don't like labels, but the way that you view and you see and you feel energy. And then we had to stamp on the balloon, and it took me to places I'd never been. It really pushed on my range, you know. And then one of the times we had to buy a toy, and we all had to come together and sit down on the ground as a group and play with toys like we were children. And it was one of the most terrifying things I've ever done. And yet I've been a nursery nurse, you know, and spent years with children. But it was, and what I experienced was actual dark, what I would consider demonic or disassociated entities whacking me. I got 4 smacks. And in the house we grew up in, it was haunted, it was violent, it was built on violent ground. There was a serial killer over the road. Chris, you took us on these just mind-blowing, like, how did you come up with these concepts and these teachings in the way that you have?
I think that the idea of a teacher is not just to put out data. Our academic system does that, and it works for some people. But if you read, I have 2 PhDs. And so when you start to read people that are published and you find that really they didn't get their inspiration so much from school, but from a project that they got involved in too. So when I originally went into psychology, I got involved in through some connections from people that are doing some intuitive work or psychic work or whatever. And I found that was really easy to flow into. So I got involved with people, in a dark room, they'd have a face appear inside of a box and the face would talk to you, and all these kind of things that went on. I classify them as phenomena. They don't come in the logical world, but they're most certainly things that exist out there. So building a relationship with that stuff, I think, is very beneficial because it gets us outside of the little framework we have. It builds a bigger range, and the potential always exists outside of something you already know, or otherwise you're already doing it. So I think when I'm teaching, what I learned a long time ago is you start to talk about something, and then everybody in the room has a certain association of energy that goes with that. They're a little defended because they're saying, oh, I don't want to bring that in, or maybe my experience wasn't that good, or maybe my experience was wonderful, or whatever. What you do is then you allow that to come into the room. You actually manage the room. You let that energy flow in. You don't judge it. So you open that up and you let it come in. The person then, everybody is sitting in their unique experience on that topic. And then from that point, they can grow and change. If they don't go back to it, and then they have 2 topics, the one that didn't work and the one that supposedly works. And if you have more experience with the one that doesn't work, who's going to win? So if you get something in, you have to get them on equal grounds. And here it didn't work, here it is. I can remember when I first met Deborah, she was sitting side chair in a reading. She had taken some classes. That's my wife now. And so I'm working on this woman who had had a lot of child abuse, and she's wigging out. And so she's flopping around on the floor. And I said to Deborah, who's sitting next to me, I had about 6 people in line. I said, Deborah, would you put your foot on her so she don't hurt herself as she's flopping around on the floor? And it's kind of like, so when I finally got her through that energy, why, she got up and sat in a chair again, brushed herself off. And we sat there and talked. Now, she had no memory. As a matter of fact, when she got the tape from it, the tape was totally blank, right? So she had no memory of anything that went on, but all of a sudden her life changed. Within 6 months, she was in a relationship. She finally got a place to live. Her whole life started unfolding to where she was totally in the defense and sick. She had quote unquote mercury poisoning and was going to die. And that's why she came to see me. And she never went back to a doctor. And to this day, she's still alive, and it's 30 years ago. So you start to see it's like whatever was festering in there was destroying this whole assembly of mass, right? And as soon as she got to where she could balance those two acts out, what was the abuse she took and the fact that she could find a potential, a joy in her life of some sort. When she found those to balance, she gave her a chance. And that's what we need to do. I think all of our work, we need to influence people in some way, shape, or form, somehow or another. I had one of my students say, Chris, sometimes you come across really nice, and sometimes you come across like I've seen you say things like to people they're trying to make change. And I said, tell me, do you have to take a test and be this ignorant, or do they actually have to train you? And they look at me and I'm smiling, and I'm not doing anything. And they look at me and then they just laugh. And they say, oh, and then all of a sudden they can figure out the change. And then they come back, and they say, thank you very much. And there's no animosity because there's no judgment in that. I'm trying to wake them up. See, I'm trying to make two poles. I'm trying to get them to look at those two. And I see people watching and they go, oh my God, I can't believe you said that. I'm saying,
I know, I witnessed you so many times. It's like, man, did you rattle people's cage? And that they would look at you and think, oh my God, what's wrong with you? You're so aggressive, but you really weren't. But you did that. You were just pushing on them to get them to kind of respond and open
wake up.
Something.
Yes.
Yeah. And it was incredible. It was incredible. And out of all of the people, I mean, God, there are so many. I mean, I could probably easily remember 30 minimum people that came through your school over that time, probably more. And I've shared the blah, blah, blah exercise, which to this day, I use it in my own clinic, my own practice, where the worst thing that's ever happened to you, you sit in front of someone and you just use the word blah. Say like, I was kidnapped for 3 years, blah, 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 blah. You're getting it out and moving it. Such a powerful exercise. And during that time, there were many, myself included, messed up, screwed up, angry, rageful, abused, terrorized, frightened adults that came through your school. And the most, aside from you and your beautiful wife, Deborah, who I was there and when you guys met, there was this one beautiful lady, and again, I've spoken about her too, probably as much as you, Dr. Mayu Soro Espinosa, our beloved, that was, taken and survived 6 death camps. And talking of the way that you would push on people, you would set a meditation or a task or something to do, and then you would go around and you would really try and make every single person answer in response to what they just experienced in real time. She was the only one I ever saw you say, you don't have to, Mayu. The only one. And I know she really, really respected that. And I think someone like her, and please respond to this, because if I look at that and I look at you as I've known you to be, that little girl to that woman that she became, that amazing woman that actually ended up becoming one of your teachers and a teacher of mine and a really, really best friend of mine before she died. How could you have experienced more range than someone like Mayu Soro Espinosa?
Yeah, and sometimes it's like she had such a struggle pushing the boundaries from so many things in life. She should have probably jumped into more topics to expand range out. But this is what happens to us. Unfortunately, sometimes we say, no, this is what I do. And then you're fighting all the time. You wonder, what is that, right? And we've seen people in a job where they just seem to never get ahead, but they won't quit or they won't do something different. And sometimes you just got to go start to build platforms where you can get into. And then sometimes when you build a range in different areas, all of a sudden this will open up and you'll feel that release. And so she was trying to do as an artist, as all those other things that she was in life, a lot of things that she had accomplished, but there was this little struggle that she had that she wouldn't let go of. And so there was a little scenario that just one little piece, and it's just like, and so it was, I'm going to beat this. Well, quit trying to beat everything. try to live life, not beat life. It's not meant to be a war. So when we get into big of a, the Buddhist tradition, they talk about struggle, but really when you translate the word they use for struggle, it means that the hole in the wheel is out around. So it just means the wheel's going bump, bump, bump. When your life goes bump, 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 that's when you come into what the Buddhists would call struggle. It's like, stop it. Don't do that anymore. Do something different. Don't try to fix it. Don't try to make it right. Don't try to repair the world. The world doesn't want to be repaired. Get a grip. So it really wants to get along. It doesn't want to be judged. It doesn't want to be, this is the way you should be. It doesn't want any of that. It just wants to have an experience. Come on, we're playing a game like Monopoly. You start and you end, and they put the board away and it goes in a drawer. It doesn't matter if you win or lose. So at this point, we all just die. It doesn't matter if we win or lose. So you start to see it's kind of like we need to engage in a game and squeeze all the juice we can out of this. Otherwise, why are we here? It's just depressive, right? So really got to find the fun in it. We got to find the value in it. We got to find the excitement in it. We've got to really kind of engage. And things don't always go the way we plan. So we've got to just really turn it around and get what we can out of it. If you bump your head, hopefully you've learned to duck. If you didn't, it's not going to go well for you, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, perfect sense. Perfect sense. It's something else as well in terms of range. So there's something in people, and I have recognized it in myself over the years. I call it academic snobbery. Academic snobbery, and that's okay. That's okay, So when you were talking earlier, you mentioned the fact that you actually do have 2 PhDs, and something happens in people where they'll be watching this for the first few minutes and they might go, not what's this about? Like they're going into psychology, psychosis, trauma, healing. What are they talking about here exactly? And then you say, oh, I have 2 PhDs. Something happens in people where a switch in the brain occurs and they hit that authority button. Oh, he obviously knows what he's talking about. And that's absolutely true, you do, of course. But equally, again, having known you for so many years, you could equally be a man who was a writer in Hollywood, of which there are many, who's ended up on the streets, but is some kind of freaking genius. So people are going to make a discernment in themselves. Do I go with the person who studied academically with 2 PhDs? Do I go with the writer that was trying to aim in Hollywood because that's kind of impressive to some people? This man is completely broken down. He's standing on the corner, but he's got so many gifts in him. And there is a massive range in the 2 things I've just said, which is what we're obviously trying to kind of highlight more and more. But I think it's really important, Chris, that people like listening to this conversation, like get that, internalize that, and start to really put that in front of themselves, because right now, the suffocation that most people, not the arseholes at the top, but most people on the ground, boots on the ground, are in such restriction. They're so constricted because of the horror of the last 2 years in all its guises. So what do you think are some of the ways that people can allow themselves to expand? Because they can be looking at you saying, it's all right for you to say that, you're retired, you're fine, you've got a loving wife, what could we suggest for them to, without being offensive, but to suggest that they do to help themselves to expand their range, their emotional range?
Well, in anything is going to have all those. I look at my wife. We've been married, I don't know how many years now, but nonetheless, a long time. And there are days when I look at her and I say, what the heck is she doing? Right? It doesn't make any sense. But then what I have to do is I have to step back a little bit and I have to say, wow, so she's researching something. She's doing something, not something I would do. So I can't get in the middle of judging that. I got to wait and see what the outcome is. We can have a dialogue at the outcome. It's like, okay, that didn't work very well. Maybe next time we should try this. But in the middle of the process, I can't get in the middle of it. And that's what I see predominantly, or at least in the world of psychology, sees predominantly between men and women in a process. You got a man and a woman, you have them do a job. They'll both do the job absolutely fine. It's just that the women do it in a different sort of way than the men. So if they look at each other doing it, they will judge that they're doing it wrong. They're not doing it wrong. They're doing it a style that probably is more culturally driven than anything, because we see it changing today, but everything's changing. So it's hard to say. But for most certainly over the years, that culturally piece changed. And that's why I always like to have a staff, which was some women, some men, some so that we could shuffle people around. They could take classes with different people so they could see these concepts come from different views and how to arrive at them, right? And I found that the person that got run over by the truck the most was the best teacher, because they finally got the fact that it's not working the way they were doing it. They're open to some other way. I think at any time you think you know something, you have to look at your life and say, wow, how many times did I know something and it didn't work out? So then you have to step back and say, okay, so maybe now I've arrived at a better idea, but maybe the other person hasn't. So maybe I could share that with them, or maybe I can't. And that is the judgment you have to go on. You have to go on a judgment of, are they ready to step into a new idea? Are they ready to open it up? Or are they polarized and they want to run their idea till it hits a wall? Because some of us really have to hit a wall before we're willing to change, right? So it's like, so you have to look at that. And that is a piece of respecting someone. So I see this kid down the street that just got his little skateboard thing, and he says, oh, look, I'm playing with it. And I said, yeah. I said, you'd need to tell your dad to get you some pads to put on. And he said, oh, I don't fall down. I said, well, as you get better, getting better means you need to fall down. Nobody learns to ride a bicycle without falling down. Nobody gets to be on a skateboard without falling down, right? When my kids got skateboards, I went out, got one, and I was playing with it, and I realized they got up faster than I did, so I better stop. And the same with motorcycle racing. I mean, I got to a point where I was motorcycle racing, and pretty soon I look around and these young guys would jump up and be back on a motorcycle, and I'm sitting going, oh my God. I was old. I was like 30 years old, and they were like 19 and 20. And it's like, I'm going to sell this motorcycle. So those are the lessons that I learned in life. It's like, when it's not working anymore, you don't try harder. You don't get more protection. You just got to say, maybe I need to go into a different range. Maybe I've squeezed all the juice I'm going to get out of this, right? I have no interest in buying a motorcycle and driving around on the hills and making all kinds of noise and being a nuisance to the world. It was fun when I was there, but at this point, no, I wouldn't do it again. So all those things enrich the history of who you are, because now empathetically, I can relate to someone who wants to do that. We can even sit down and have stories. We can relate on those terms because we have common ground, which is wonderful. Everybody has common ground somewhere. And yet it doesn't mean I have to go with them. It doesn't mean that I need to get sold. It doesn't mean I need to join anything. We can relate without joining a club, right? We join a club or joining a bias. We just really need to relate. And so I can look at my neighbor and I can say, okay, I don't agree with him at all, but his tree needs pruning and he don't have time. So I went over and I said, hey, I'm retired. I got time. Your tree's a mess, dude. So I got time. If you want, I will take it out because it's right next to your building and it's just going to destroy your house. So he said, well, let me check with my wife. Of course, that was sensible. So he did. But really what he did, he checked with his gardener. And when he found out his gardener said he wanted $300 to take the tree down, he decided it'd be better have me do it for free, right? That's really what happened, but it's okay. So he came back over to me a week later and said, go ahead. Well, it took me 2 hours to cut his whole tree down and bring the whole mess out and fix the whole thing, right? Because I live in a neighborhood, and I'm retired. And so that's kind of what I do. When old lady down the street leaves falling in the gutters, I go over there and get up on the roof and she keeps saying, you're almost as old as I am. You shouldn't be on that roof. And I said, well, you want to come up and help me? And she says, I'm not going up there. I said, well, then you better leave me do it, right? So I'm up cleaning her gutters out because otherwise she doesn't have the funding. Otherwise she's got to pay someone X amount of dollars to come out and do it, right? And then that compounds destruction. So I think when I live in a neighborhood, I look around at what needs to be done. I go talk to them. My fence down neighbor on the other side, fence post broke. I went over and fixed that earlier this year. And so those things I think we need to share with people. That still comes into the title I called teaching, right? Because I'm teaching relationship to them, right? And so I cleaned the leaves in her house a couple of times, and then she got one of those devices with a vacuum that reaches up over because she's not tall enough and she's unstable on ladders because she's a little overweight. So she's managed, so she found a solution. Innovation came in. Maybe she felt bad having me do it over every time and not wanting any pay, but for the most part, it got her to find innovation and it got her engaged. If she engages, she's got movement. Life is about movement. She's moving, she's doing something. She's dancing with life. And that really is very vital. Their value comes from.
You know, right there, that's one of the most important things, and really, truly, you know, it's so difficult for people once to get into that depressive state. I've been there, you know, recently I've been there, where you just don't want to move, you don't want to live, you get so stuck, you think and you just lay around all day. You know, I was getting over the death of my fiance, as I know, I thank God goodness you were there in my world, and I did sit and spend time with you, and you know, and helping me get through that shock and trauma, the, you know, and the PTSD that comes with a violent end of somebody that you love, you know, that's your life partner. So it, just by suggesting, encouraging, you know, people to move the body, you know, people get this mindset like, I need to go to the gym, or I need to lose weight before I get myself into the gym. We don't need a fucking gym. You go in the kitchen, you put your hands on the island or the sink and just very gently start standing up and down. Get your arse glutes moving, get your thigh legs moving, get your blood pumping, there's not one single excuse. Oh, I can't stand, I can't walk. Well, even if you're sitting in a chair, you can, there's always something somebody can do, unless they are completely, like one lady, the most disabled lady I ever met was in Coronado. And this poor lady had suffered a divorce, had the most chronic illness, and was so disabled, all she could do was move her head. That's all she could do. And she had pictures in her house of her former husband and children and her, and every picture his head was cut out. And that woman was surrounded by all her pain and agony and rage. And there she was lying. And so it's an extreme example, you know, and she just got iller and iller, and children and everyone else was looking after her. It's really sad. I don't even know what happened. This is like 20 odd years ago. But I remember looking at that thinking, oh my gosh, that's the most unwell, disabled, physically disabled person I've ever met in my life. And I tried, you know me, I did try to lovingly suggest ways of undoing, ways of inner healing, ways of whatever. But anyway, but again, back to, there are some very lazy people, and I've been a lazy cow. Such a lazy cow. Like, no, I'm going to do nothing this week. I'm going to eat ice cream every day. Well, 33 pounds later, I'm like, oh God. And then even today I had the thought, you know what, Dani, you really got to stop going into that, place you've been, that emotional space of grieving, where you've been gaining weight and eating your feelings and all the, this is what some people, when they're stressed, they eat. Some people, when they're stressed, they don't eat. And so like going there, I'm like, yeah, I've really got to get a new story now. You know, I really can't keep talking about my beloved to myself even. I feel like this because of this, because like, how long am I going to live in this? I mean, it's always going to be there forever, but you know what I mean? It's a difficult thing to phrase, but everyone does it. Everyone has a story. A 20-year-old boy won't leave his room, just wants to do his gaming all day, in a depressive mindset. There's so many young people, my God, Chris, right now, we know because of the constriction. You know, so again, it's finding ways to move the body so the mind doesn't atrophy and the body doesn't atrophy. So anyway, so just sharing thoughts. So please continue.
Yes. Stories are essential for us humans, because when we look out at the world, we're not in the world. We don't see us, right? Our eyes are here, so we don't see us. So we then have to talk about it and put us into it. So there's essential. The mishap is that when we think our stories are true, their stories are useful, but not necessarily true, right? Mm-hmm. We always miss details without question. And so there's always things going on. And I was really surprised when I was eons and eons ago. One of the things I did with an FBI class that I went to, a training class that I did, and they would have you walk in a room, and it was just a scene, had actors. It was a room that was set up, had all kinds of artifacts, junk in it. It was like a room in somebody's house, had furniture and everything in it. And you looked around the room and you noted what you could note. You stood in there for like 2 minutes, and then you went into the other room and wrote down everything that you said you saw. And then the instructor then would take and hypnotize one person, put them into a trance, and find out that they had, of the 8 or 9 or 10 things that we recorded, or 12, some people got 20, why, there would be another 40 or 50 things that the person under hypnosis would have noticed, but just didn't make it conscious because it was in the script. like there were 3 clocks in a room, all set at different times. I didn't notice that. I noticed the clock. I didn't notice 3. So it was really interesting. So they just hypnotized one person, but they hypnotized that person as they rattled off everything they remembered. So we get all that stimulus. I think the optic nerve puts out something like 11 million bits of data, whereas our brain only processes consciously 7 plus or minus 2 bits. That's a paper by author A. Miller. And it's the most quoted paper in psychology and one of the 10 most quoted papers in science. So it just means that we're really most of the time unconscious or in some type of a trance state, right? So as we open range up, it just means that we wake up a little more. You see someone with their phone and they're pretty much in a trance state, right? They just wander along. And Deborah and I went out for an event. I don't know, it was Valentine's or something. We went to a nice restaurant because I was being a loving husband or whatever. And so there we are, and we're having this wonderful dinner, which, costs $150 or whatever. And there's a young couple at the table next to me, and they're both sitting there and they're on their phone, both of them. And the whole time we're sitting there talking for an hour and a half. And so when we get up to leave, the woman looked around and she said, "How can you guys talk so much?" And I just really wanted to respond and say, how could you sit there and pay $150 for a meal and not talk to each other at all? And just take pictures of food, and then send each other texts back and forth. And it's kind of like, oh my gosh. So they were curious how we could just talk for that hour and 20 minutes, but we just talked. And so we're losing those pieces of range where we can talk about a topic. You and I could sit and talk for hours and hours and hours. We're limited because of, recording times, right? But nonetheless, when you start to see that expands all this ability, because now you're a resource for anybody who walks up. When you interact, it's like any topic they have, I can talk to them about it. Even if I don't know something about it, I say, I don't know something about it. Tell me something. What's the most important thing I need to know? What would benefit me in my life? Those are good questions that comes from playing with ranges. I don't have to go into competition and be smarter than them. I really need to know what can I learn from them, right? Because then I get smarter and they get smarter, right? And so the whole range builds. It's a simple concept, but it's really difficult to implement because our conscious piece is so narrow. When I'm on the phone or working on a computer and somebody wants to talk to me, it's kind of like your head goes back and forth. You know how hard it is? Or well, certainly with children, I can remember they're just like always right there. It's like, oh my goodness, you got to stop and right. So it's a legitimate experience that all humans have, I think.
Yeah, it's amazing. And someone like you as well, you walk your talk, and it's really annoying, it has been annoying in the past to have to learn that if I would text you, you wouldn't get back for 3 or 4 days. And then I learned, because you set the rule, if you want me, email me. It'll still take a while because nothing runs you, which has been really interesting to witness over the years. Nothing actually runs Chris Lemmon. You just set a rule, stick with it, and then anyone that wants to come into your space to pick your brain or sit with you or have a session with you, there's a setup that you have which doesn't pull you into the dystopia of everyone's energy. And I always found that really clever. Once I'd learned to manage my own impatience or my own judgment, about that, which again is a sensible place to go, because people lie to themselves all of the time. We all do it. We've all done it. I wanted to mention one of the, I wrote down monkey story. Oh yeah, the monkey story, your monkey story. Please share that, because it's just so brilliant. And I'm in Costa Rica, surrounded by the howler monkeys, but this is, I think, is a really, this is an amazing illustration of perception and range and decision. So,
you talk about my trip to Costa Rica, the monkey.
The monkey in the restaurant. Yeah.
So I was in San Antonio and staying at a hotel in Costa Rica. And I wanted to see some monkeys. And it was the time of year where they weren't out except in the morning. Supposedly when I talked to the person at the hotel, they said you won't see them out in the daytime because the temperature is not right for them. So you got to get up like at 5 a.m. You'll see them all over the place. You can hear them at 5 a.m. and you'll see them. But if you don't get up until 9 o'clock, you're having breakfast, the monkeys are gone at that time of year. So I'm thinking, well, I don't want to get up at 5 a.m. That's ridiculous, right? So to see a monkey. So what I decided to do, I'm driving down the road and it was around lunchtime. And I thought, well, I'm not particularly hungry, but I thought I'd stop and get something to drink. And so I whipped in there and I thought, well, we'll get maybe a little bite. I was talking myself into food. So we got out and we started to walk in. I looked and the place was completely empty. Now I had driven past it before and it's usually a lot of people there. And I thought, well, I wonder if they're closed today for some reason, right? I'm just inquisitive. And then I see the cook way back and all the way back, standing in the doorway with a cleaver in his hand. And I thought, maybe it's not a good day for him, right? Maybe I should go somewhere else to have lunch.
Yeah.
And I look around and then I see a monkey sitting over there at the table. And I go, oh, so I thought, well, there's a monkey. So I walk over and pull up a chair and sit down. I said, do you mind if I join you? And the monkey's looking at me like, what are you idiot? He picked up a salt shaker and I said, hey, I don't need any salt. I don't even have any food. Put that thing down. I know he was going to throw it, right? But that's what they do. And he's looking at me and I said, put that down. We don't have any food. Put that down. I said, what are you doing here? Did you order something? It doesn't look like they're very friendly. I don't know if they're even in business. And I'm just having a conversation. Of course, he can't understand anything I'm saying, but it's not about understanding. It's about the nature of who I was. I was having a talk with him like I'd have a talk with you. And so all of a sudden, I'm now making the monkey a contact. We have a relationship, whether he's participating or she's participating. I don't know. There was no gender markers that I noticed, but nonetheless, we're sitting there and I'm having a conversation. The monkey's looking at me pretty soon, scratching, smiling, doing this, that, and the other, right? Like monkeys do. And then finally, I see a gathering of about 3 people in the hallway. And I'm thinking, I think that we're getting to a boiling point here. And so obviously, they're not going to serve us. So I think that they find you and I offensive. So I think probably you and I both should just leave, right? Don't you think so? Because we're not going to get served here. I don't know why they don't like you, but I'm a foreigner, so maybe they don't like foreigners, but you live here. I don't know. And he's looking at me and he's scratching his head. I said, so I think we should just go. So I get up and he got up and he went over and jumped over the fence and took off in the trees. And I was walking to the door just to leave. And I hear this lady goes, oh, thank you. Oh my God, thank you. And she's running out and she's hugging me because I got rid of the monkey. She says, with an open restaurant, they throw things around, and it's like, they want to break stuff, right? So that's the problem. And that's why they were all scared, right? Because they'll throw things at them, chairs and flower vases, everything, right?
Wow.
So I said, no, that monkey was just mad because it wasn't getting respected. It lives here, right? And so, so anyway, I did sit down and have lunch and iced tea or something. And then, of course, when it came to pay, why they said, oh, no, you got rid of the monkey, fine. So I just left the tip and we just left. But that was, so it is interesting. It doesn't, no matter what, most animals, if they're angry and defensive and they're showing their teeth, then it tells you a good indication to respect that. Because I don't want someone to be friendly with me when I'm mad, right?
Yeah.
So at that point, they need space. But if they're not hostile and they're just looking at you, you can open up a conversation, right? They don't have to understand you. Matter of fact, I've been teaching for years. 90% of the time, people say, I have no idea what you said. So that's all fine and good.
Yeah, that's a very good point, though, on so many levels. So if you look at the monkey, it's that it's not speaking the same language. It's a very different species, and apparently, and yet you did something. You changed its range, its emotional frequency. So maybe it went away thinking, I'm not going to go there again. I'm okay now. Something happened. I felt heard, seen, and respected, which was his big problem, right? Which you picked up intuitively with the verbal, non-verbal, non-English language the monkey is speaking. And and there was a payoff for that, right? A financial payoff, an emotional payoff, a food payoff. And it's things like that, like changing perceptions and perspectives on other people, on other beings, that give us experiences that we never could have even imagined we'd have. Back to some of the classes that you used to teach us. I remember there was one in particular where you had everyone, and this was like there must have been 40 people in the room. It's all sitting in that big, huge circle in your church, and you played sounds. You had us all write down every single sound that we had, and we did that, and it got to my turn, and I think I had like, I don't know, 6, 7 more than everybody else in the room. And I remember people laughing at me, right, which triggers the inner child because you feel like an idiot. But that was, again, all part of the getting through, getting over, having range from child to the adult that you are now, catching yourself up, Right. And I remember I'd heard in particular like a fax machine underscore high pitch resonance. I'd heard a helicopter and other things. And then you didn't confirm or disagree with anyone until everybody was done. And then you then came back and said, Dani was the only one that got all of that. And so all the people tittering around the room, then stopped tittering, and then they were then questioning, how come I didn't hear that? How come I didn't hear that? And for me, in that kind of growth range in me, seeing you as the elder in the room, it was an amazing moment of feeling really seen, heard, communicated to, respected. And I didn't need to gloat or feel like, oh, good, you idiots, that you didn't hear. None of that mattered to me. But what you are very good at and are brilliant at is allowing the person to take back responsibility for how they feel. You know what I mean? So like, let's say that monkey, it's such a huge story. That's why it stuck with me in so many different ways. It's a different species, yet there was a common language, whether it was emotional, whether it was metaphysical, chemical, spiritual, something happened significant enough, non-verbal, that there was some kind of an emotional payoff all around, right?
Right. And so that's what we experience, is when you get validation without a judgment or without a competition, then all of a sudden you think, I'm doing pretty good. So you feel pretty good. And everybody else looks around and they then sit and think, oh, okay. If they're in that same mode, they don't look at that, oh, they did better. They look at that, oh, wow, that's kind of interesting. So now they're looking at how you got it rather than why you got it and they didn't. And that's the difference. That's opening up. You really need to stage it so it opens up. When you look around and you see somebody go by, when the kids get off the bus, they walk past in front of my house. Some of the kids got drinks and stuff in their hands and they just throw it in my yard, right? And I watch these kids, some Hispanic kids around the corner. And when they walk by, they pick up that trash.
Oh.
Because of their culture, it's kind of like their house is clean. Everything around the front of their house is clean. There's no garbage out there. They're very conscious of that. So these kids that I don't know what Hispanic part of the world that they originally came from, but they speak some type of Spanish, and are really sweet kids. And I say hi to them, they say hi. Other kids, I say hi, and they kind of turn their head away. So it's really interesting to see that they have come from a different culture, a different background. But I see them all the time when they walk by, they pick up things. And so one day I was out there and I said, I just wanted to thank you for picking things up. That was really nice of you. And they said, oh, no, that's okay. We just take it home, put it in our trash, I said, yeah, and all those other kids are going home. And why don't they just take it home and put it in the trash, right? They're only 1 block away. The bus dropped them off right here. And the kid just goes, I don't know. It's like, yeah. So they don't have a whole lot of judgment. They weren't even paying attention. But when we had a conversation, they started to then be able to account for all that. They could then know the validation that they do it differently. There was no judgment on which was right or wrong. It was just simply validation for the fact that they did something. And so, and I think that's the whole goal, is you did that. You accomplished that. You accomplished that. You need to know when you accomplish something, and you need to know when you fail with something so that you can get out of it and not do it again. So many people repeat. And a lot of people don't understand, when we learn something, the scenario in the learning everything that occurred around the learning stays with the learning experience. It's kind of contaminated. It's attached to it. So if we learn something the first time and it doesn't go very well, then that's always a stigma that shows up. And then it takes a lot of success to overcome that. And then when you have a lot of success, you may feel really comfortable. And then all of a sudden, 10 years later, you might have a bad day and you're having an experience, and then that memory comes back. It just means it never goes away. We keep all that, we store it all. It just means that it stacks up on top, and it distances you from the bad experience to the good experience, right? And it just comes back up. My wife and I were taking dancing lessons, and so we were dancing, just trying to get some more social time in, going to some of the dance clubs around. I had dance competition in my youth. That was a long time ago. And so it was just kind of fun to be able to go out and dancing with her. So the instructor was having us do all these steps. Well, they have changed the style in dancing quite a bit from when I was dancing competition. Today, my best day would not win anything, right? But then it was then, and now it's today, right? And they do flight, they do all kinds of stuff today. But nonetheless, they were showing us techniques, and the teacher came over to me. He said, "I can see that you've done some dancing, because when she gets out of step or somebody cuts you off or something, you shuffle around and you just pick the pace back up again, go back into it." And most everybody has to stop and rethink it through, right? Because it's a pattern. So that same thing goes with all patterns. We get into a pattern, we run it, we run it, and we run it. If it doesn't work, then if we get out of that pattern and start doing other patterns, then we get back into it, we find that we can make adaptations to navigate around those. It's a learning piece that we can learn. So when you have a skill set that you have mastered, but it's failing on you, get away from it, get into other ranges, learn to adapt things in other ranges where it's not so defended and you don't have the stigma. And then when you get back into it, you now have a skill set you're bringing back to overcome the stigma and adapt better at what you've been able to do, right? And expand that out. You'll get that success. And you hear stories of people that say, I just reading a book right now on a mathematician. He worked this math out and he thought he had it all figured out, and someone proved he was wrong, and he was just all bummed about it. So he got into something totally different. And as he went down to this, because they're working for papers and stuff, as he's working down through this new system he's in, new range, all of a sudden he discovered in this new range something nobody knew before, but he discovered why his first one didn't work. And then he could go back and publish both with the correct data. So that's the nature of it. He was smart enough to say, I feel that I need to leave it alone, get away from it, and do something different. And so that's sometimes what you have to do. You have to move to Costa Rica. You have to do something, right? You have to do something different. And then all of a sudden, allow all this stuff to come to fruition for yourself in a different environment where you don't have that conflict. Once again, it depends what patterns you run, but patterns just means the matrix of how it unfolds for us, the way it works out for us, right? So there's a lot of different patterns, and we mix them. Everybody is uniquely different. That's the complexity of it. But a tic-tac-toe square, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 boxes. I think that mathematicians say there's like 350 some different combinations you can make with whole numbers in those. So when you start to look at 40 or 50 patterns, you can see hundreds of thousands, probably somewhere close to 8 billion, right? Because that's how many people we have, close to that, 7.5, 8 billion. So there gives us all uniqueness, right? So we all have our own uniqueness, our own, I like to call them sets of threads. We have a thread we follow the way we do it. And so we just got to figure out, we learn something and then we have to lose the teacher and then learn it for ourselves on our thread, on our pattern, or on our path. And then we got it, right?
Yeah. You, your lifetime, I mean, the roles that you've played, the jobs that you've had, the careers that you've had, policeman, fireman, teacher, I mean, just incredible. But I remember a story you shared as a little boy, a tiny little boy, and starting to have awareness of the world that you were in. And I would love for you to share, because again, there are so many people coming into some kind of awakening, changing range awareness in themselves. They've forgotten things that they would look at, stare at, play with, contemplate, think about, because life got in the way. Now we're all being forced to look inside, internalize it in this time of mass healing that I believe the whole planet is going through. Can you tell the story? Well, actually, you pick a story, but I'm just one in particular I remember is when you realized the molecular structure of the plastic chair and you basically broke it down. But can you give us some kind of insight into who the very right Reverend Dr. Chris Lemmon was as a tiny child?
Yeah, and maybe I'll give you a little different one. When I was 4, it was Christmas time, and it was Christmas parade, Santa Claus come. So it's like, wow, big thing for a 4-year-old. So my mother took me down to the Christmas parade. My father had died when I was 2, so she took me down with whatever her present boyfriend was, and we went to see the Christmas parade. In that particular town in Pennsylvania, it was kind of in the evening, right at dusk. So it was like ended at dark. So you had to wait to the end to see Santa Claus. So we were standing out there. Well, I'm 4 years old, so they bundled me up. I was kind of like a penguin. I mean, I had so much covers and layers on and hats, and I could barely see. And of course, this man whom my mother was with had me on his shoulder so I could see over the crowd. So I could see this whole thing. And I was just shivering the whole time. And when I got home, my grandmother had a bucket of hot water on the floor to put my feet in and hot chocolate she was giving me. And my teeth were chattering for 20 minutes. And it's like I had a hard time going to sleep that night because it was so cold. To me, it was cold at 4. The next year at 5, I said, okay, I'm not going to let this happen again. So I'm going to change this. So I started realizing it's like, I know it's cold. It doesn't mean I have to be a victim to it. That's a relationship, right? So I started to understand it's like kids in the neighborhood, some were playful and nice and some were not nice. So you just stay away from the ones that are nice, right? So you build relationships. So I said, this is just a relationship. So now I'm 5, I'm a big kid now, right? Compared to 4. So I get to dress myself, right? So I'm dressed in a coat, warm, but not bundled up with thermal layers and everything. I can move my arms, you know, I can move my body. And we went out there. It was so cold at age 5 that my mother said, I'm not going out there. So she just let her boyfriend take me. You know, it's always abusing the boyfriend. So anyway, he takes me out. She eventually married him. He takes me out and we're out there and it's even colder than the year before. And it was snowing. And so there was snow on the ground and I'm on his shoulder again. And not only that, I finally said, hey, get me off the shoulder. And I just pushed my way through the crowd. I was really brazen. And I got to the front. I was standing, you know, I didn't block anybody's view and I'm standing right in the front and the whole thing's going by and I'm standing there in the snow up to, you know, halfway up to my knees and watching this whole thing. And I got home and of course my grandmother had a bucket of water and everything, but I'm sitting there, my teeth aren't chattering. I take my coat off and it's kind of like, wow, my shirt underneath was wet from sweating. It's like, wow. And it's just like, wow. And I put my feet in there because I was, you know, she's going to pamper me. Why turn that down? But it's like, I'm sitting here thinking, God, this is amazing. This actually worked. For me, it was a really affirming thing because it's like, I finally figured out I could influence something. Kids don't understand they can influence something. You know, I used to talk to adults and then at some point in time, you realize that they would either judge you or criticize you. And so you just shut up and you don't talk to them anymore. Now that's something you learn that then starts to be attached to when it's your turn to speak and that gets in the way, right? So those are the things that have to come out. And so at that point, I could not tell anybody, but it's like, okay, I'm done being cold. So that's why I run around in 40-degree temperatures like this, t-shirt weather and stuff. It's like, no, forget it. I got a relationship with cold. It is cold out. I don't have to be cold. There's a difference. Doesn't mean I don't get chilled. It's not like all powerful. It just means it's a different relationship, right? Just like if somebody's offensive, it doesn't mean I have to take offense. I can just walk away, right? So it's just that ability to separate, to not fully identify with something, but to separate and allow both to exist. Just be one with it. That makes sense. So I'm expressing it not from a 5-year-old viewpoint, because at the time I was just experimenting to see what happened, because I most certainly never wanted to be that cold again ever. And, you know, I was a ski instructor and skied for years. And it's like, I never got that cold again. When no one else was skiing, I was skiing. And everyone was wearing a coat. And I was a ski instructor and they made us wear a jacket that had a zipper on it and their emblem. I went down and got a long sleeve t-shirt and had embroidery shown in front that looked like a zipper and had the emblem sewed on it. So I could wear a long sleeve t-shirt out there skiing. And when they see me out the window, they think I'm in uniform, right? They had no idea that I wasn't, right? Because I didn't want to be wearing that sweater all day. It's just too hot. So it's interesting how opens up. See, that's what I'm saying. That opens up more range, more ability, more potential. My God, that's what everybody wants, is more potential, right? We want to get more out of this experience called life. We want to squeeze it out. So you got to get out there and find it. It's somewhere in that mixed up bag of stuff. So get into it, look around for it, try something over here, try something over there, find out what starts to work for you, right? Right. Does that make sense?
It does. And it's incredible that a little boy that had such an extremely uncomfortable experience held that and was determined to manage that somehow. Like, where do you think, because that's very young, 4 years old, Chris, it's very young to have that kind of awareness. Where do you think that came from? Do you think you came in with it? Was it your natural nature? Was it your nurture to be advised or encouraged to think about things? Or, you know, sometimes parents are so cruel that the child is aware of a vulnerability and an aloneness and a need to survive with self, of self, for self. What do you think it was?
I don't know, probably brain damage, more than likely. But no, my grandmother actually, my grandfather worked 6 days a week, so my grandmother was always in the house. So basically, she was a caretaker. My father died when I was 2. My mother had a full-time job. So, and we lived in my grandmother's house. So for the most part, they were all very sweet, loving, kind, gentle people. We had a basement, and that was my playground. And occasionally, relatives or other kids would come over and play down there with me, or occasionally I'd go visit them. Most of the time when it's a different time. Most of the time when I would get up, I was 5 years old, 44, I was born 1949. By the time I'm 5 years old, I would get up in the morning, have breakfast, and I would leave, and I'd say bye to my grandmother, and I would go. And she'd say, be back by 5 o'clock. Every day I was out there in the world. So when I got married and had kids, I told my kids, go. As a matter of fact, when I go to a restaurant, I would always tell them, don't tell anybody, but your dad owns this restaurant. So you guys can do whatever you want. So if there's customers here, go talk to them. It's good for business. Never did my kids, all the time they were growing up, eat with me at a restaurant. They went and made friends and they ate with someone else. You see, it's a game of expanding. So I don't know where that idea came, but both those people are outgoing today too because of that, right? They just do that. My daughter's got a job. She's got bookkeeping she does for 3 different companies, and she's got a house that she's fixed up for wedding services. So she's got 5 businesses she's running.
Golly.
So you start to see it's kind of like all that diversity comes from what? All that range, all that comes into play, all that just gets developed. So maybe because I didn't have constraints, gave us the autonomy. There was no magic there. It just, nobody was saying I had to do this. Nobody said I had to do it that way. So that was it. My grandmother was kind of religious, but not. In other words, she went to church a lot, but she was not like religious where she quoted the Bible or anything. I didn't realize until much later she had cancer and she was dying. So for 9 years, she had a tumor. I never knew that. So that's why she went to church. She's had this, I'm going to pass pretty soon. She never said anything about it. But the other end of that is that we would go to a church camp every summer. Well, during the summer, they had Sunday school. Well, they sent me to Sunday school when I was 5. You have to be old enough. In other words, you have to be able to go to your bathroom by yourself. That's pretty much old enough for Sunday school. So they sent me to Sunday school, and I'm getting all this Jesus stuff, religious stuff, which I wasn't familiar with because we never talked about it at home. She went to church, but we never talked about it. I didn't have any information about it. So this is my first experience with it. And I'm looking at it and said, he's your leader, and they crucified him. It's like, couldn't you pick a better leader? I was like, so they threw me out of Sunday school and they barred me from Sunday school because of what I had said in front of the other students. That was a blessing because, boy, every day I got up and I just wandered the woods and I wandered the countryside. I had great experiences. I talked to trees, I talked to squirrels, I talked to birds. I talked to the garbage in the dump and it would talk back to me, of course, because it's just an assignment. It'll talk to you. Everything will talk to you, right? Talk to you, probably not in this term that we're doing right now, but communicates to you. You get a felt response from it. It's real. It's happening. It's there. It's an object. So you can feel it, right? So all those were a cherished time that allowed me to enrich and have experiences that probably if I was an isolated kid, I wouldn't have. I see kids brought up in front of a TV right now that don't have. And because I was brought up in front of people, trees, bushes, animals, I have those, right? I can remember competing with the bears for berries. And so it's like, hey, you got enough berries over there. These are mine, and having a conversation with them. I was like 6 years old.
What kind of 60s? Okay, what kind of bears? Come on, that's
they're just a brown bear. They weren't that big, no more bigger than probably a dog, right? But most certainly they were out there along the creeks and they were just gobbling the berries up. And I'm out there picking berries and they're looking at me and I said, hey, you got lots of berries over there. You leave me alone. And I just kept picking berries, and so not having a fear of them, of course, they weren't afraid of me. So it's like, they're just intent on eating. They're intent on eating berries. Do you understand why it's okay? Here's another range. You understand why it's important. A female bear gets pregnant during that season. She gets pregnant, and then at a couple of months it stops. The whole birth stops. She goes into winter time. Then in spring she has to gain 100 pounds, and when she gains 100 pounds, the birthing process starts again. So you see why it's really vital that they eat. And so they do that because that preserves the whole process of more bears coming down the pipeline, right? So, and that's why you always see the females out with all the cubs. It's not that the male left. The male left last year, right? He's out of the picture a long time ago, right? But she had to then put that 100 pounds back on to start that whole cycle. You see how ranges totally not in our dialogue of what we normally talk about, but that's a total different range. And when you find that in different ranges, you start to understand, wow, everything works in patterns. So that's just the pattern, the way they work. There's nobody judging that pattern. It's not right or wrong. It's just the way it is. So it's a good thing since you got a couple of children, you didn't have to gain 100 pounds to go through that cycle, but the bears would have had to.
I think it's amazing. You talk about the bears and like they're eating all those berries, but that they eat so much volume because berries. Who's going to gain 100 pounds on berries? Honestly, like who's going to do that? Like a human kind of thing. It's just so interesting. And then I look at gorillas, silverback gorillas, who I love and adore, massive giants, and they're foraging and eating greens all day. These giant. And then we're told all these different things about diets: eat this to be healthy, eat that to be healthy, eat this to lose weight, and then our bodies are going up and down all the time. Just that, I know that's a whole other subject kind of, but we could assimilate it into range. But it's just amazing, isn't it? It's just amazing. What do you think about that?
Well, once again, every animal has a whole series of patterns that they come into play. What we don't really understand very much is the human pattern, because we start to produce ideas or concepts. Innovation is a wonderful thing, and gorillas haven't changed in a long time, and they're phasing out fastly, but they haven't changed in a long time. When you start to look at humans, you look at humans in the way they used to live in farms. We started growing cotton and then later corn for subsidies. Innovation has come along and changed things. So we're caught up in losing our perspective of what was right and natural for us and moving into something else. Do I think it's right to go back to eat like the caveman? Probably not, because I don't want to live like the caveman, right? So I think there's been so much change in the biology during all these years. I think that each of us needs to find how our pattern unfolds. And that is a learning process that we need to go into. Maybe we need to study our microbiome, or maybe I can remember pricking my finger every day with every meal for 2 years. My fingers were sore, but that's when I was living in Southern California still. So I could start to see how different foods would affect my microbiome and how they would spike me as far as sugars go. And I could then start to formulate a diet. So that's a total different range that I never, ever talked about in classes, but I was doing that at the same time. So I always ran 4 or 5 or 6 different ranges at the same time. I can remember we went on a trip to Portugal. And when we got back, I had 16 people and I said, let's get a meeting and let everybody cook their favorite food and we'll have a potluck. So everybody liked this tomato soup they had in Portugal. I don't like tomato soup. I don't eat tomatoes. They have a reaction in my body, so I don't eat them. Everybody ate the soup and loved it. They were always looking for the soup because they loved it. So when I went to that potluck, I made that soup. And they go, how could you make the soup? You never even ate it. I said, I smelled it. So I made it from what it smelled like. And I had to kind of play with spices and stuff, and I put it all together. And they're looking at me like, you're crazy. I said, no, I'm not crazy. It's just like, because you see, that's a bigger range. Do you understand? It's a bigger range. Having a recipe is a smaller range. But being able to, what does that smell like? And it's smelling jars and looking at the textures. Oh, that's not thick enough. Oh, I need more stewed tomatoes, or I need more egg. They put egg in there. They drop egg in there. So it's really different. And a little bit of beef broth in there. So all those things I had to kind of play with to come up with that. That's what we get out of range. Range builds innovation. We build range, we build innovation. Innovation is a building block of people coming together, uniting together to create more things. Defending what we used to do doesn't build any range. And it just means that we're in a sinking ship. Hanging on to a sinking boat is never a wise idea. It goes to the bottom faster, right? So you have to make those changes. Not easy when you talk with changes. And that's why people come to classes. People come to classes or listen to you or listen to me. It's because they're looking at making changes and they say, inspire me, help me, hold my hand, walk with me. Great. I love to walk across the street holding someone's hand. I feel much safer, right?
Yeah. You raise an interesting point, and it's something I've spoken about this week, is that there is a lot of people who they fall very quickly into an addictive pattern. They fall very quickly into a need to have an adrenal payoff or an emotional payoff that we would say in psychology and therapy.
Right.
And there's a lot of people out there who are watching everything YouTube, and their YouTube is their news now, but they are looking for a specific person. And for some people, it might be me. And I don't encourage it. I don't advise it at all, advocate myself at all for anyone's diet every day. Right. But they watch a person, and then there is an adrenal payoff, an adrenal high, and they're like, oh, okay, good. And it brings down the serotonin and the dopamine and the endorphins, whatever, because they've had that plug-in fix. And we create and uncreate and create unhealthy and healthy patterns all the time. The time, every day, all day long, until we recognize, when this whole bullshittery on the planet started, this horror, I found myself looking every single day at 4, maybe 6 different people. And then one day I realized I had a little bit of anxiety, and I'm like, wow, what is that? And thanks to, mentors like you, I learned a long time ago how to arrest that feeling. What is that? Is that mine? Is that somebody else's? Did I just pick up someone's emotions? Because we're all empathic and sensitive humans. And I realized that I was looking for exactly what I've just explained. I had a connection to one particular woman. I felt safe if I just listened to what she had to say, then I'd be good for a couple of days. And then I would have anxiety if she wasn't making broadcasts. Right. You know what I mean? And so anyone that does this, like you're out on YouTube, I'm out on YouTube, and wherever, I mean, you've been teaching forever. It's really difficult for people to take responsibility for that pattern, that addiction pattern. And 9 times out of 10, like, I know I've got an addictive personality. I know what I have to be careful of. I learned a long time ago, but it's really important to point out to people, take responsibility for the pattern or the addiction or the need for the adrenal high that you need, the emotional payoff to make you feel like you're going to be okay, like your body can take that natural breath. What would you say to that?
No, I agree with you 100%. I used to have a neighbor who's moved now, but I had a neighbor who was overweight, and he'd say, how do you stay slim? And I said, well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to save you a lot of money. For 3 weeks, you eat all your meals at my house. I will feed you for 3 weeks. You eat nothing but what I give you. And we'll sit down, we'll do a little meditation, we'll do some exercise. I'm going to give you around 1,100 to 1,500 calories a day, and no snacks in between, no nothing. And I'm going to feed you. And we'll do that for 3 weeks. And I'll guarantee you in that 3 weeks, you'll lose 20 to 25 pounds. And he's looking at me, he says, oh, I can't do that. I said, won't cost you anything. Oh, no. So he goes out and he has done this for the last 20 years. He joins some plan. He loses 20 or 30 pounds, puts it back on again, does this, does this, does this, does this. And it's like, wow, that's kind of interesting. So now he's had heart surgery since then. He's had surgery with his legs. He's had veins problems because of his weight. So here he is. He's not as old as I am, but most certainly he can't walk. He can't disabled. He sits around all day in front of a computer. He can't do much of anything. It's either computer or TV. Now, I'm not judging him. I'm just saying that it's really sad. He wouldn't just let me say, come on over. I will set this up. I will do it all for you. You don't have to do anything. He just couldn't do that. Just couldn't let that happen. So we used to say they couldn't have it. That means that it doesn't fit into his idea of him. That means they couldn't have it. That's not the way I do it, Chris. I can't do it your way. Don't do it my way. Try my way for 3 weeks and then figure out your way and my way. You have now a comparison of the two, and you weigh less and decide which is going to work for you. Probably something in between will work for you. But if you don't have those parameters, you can't find the in between. You really need to have someone that says, I've walked there, I've been there, sit with me. I got through it, sit with me. And then they see that, wow. And then there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and then they can start to see that. Yes. Does that take time? Unfortunately, yes, it does take time, because boy, we just really want to go back. We want to go back. We want to go back. We are so pattern driven. It's just amazing, right? This device was never meant for that. Your brains, the job of your brain is to keep you alive. So all of the stuff that it processes is how to keep this device alive. We know now today with all the fMRIs and everything that no, when thinking is going on, there's a process that occurs searching up there for reactions, so on and so forth, that occur that are familiar, but they're patterns. And so it's a sequence of patterns that stimulates, but that's not memory storage. We have no idea where memory storage is. We can have somebody with their skull open and they're awake and they're in a surgery and we're looking at their brain and we don't see any electric impulses or anything going when they're telling us a story. It's like, wow, where is that at? So we have a little more developing to do in science. We don't know where memory is stored. So when you start to look at that, it's like, I think for the most part, it's inherently packaged in a package. It's like when you get something brand new in a box and you get it and then it breaks and you want to send it back. If you didn't say that box, you have a hard time finding something that'll fit. It really takes the design box. So we like to have the design box. The box, which is what I call the background. If the background don't work, we have to then change something, right? We have to then alter something, right? So one or the other has to change. Either the idea that you're coming from or the background behind you has to change. In other words, some people have to move. I moved from Southern California to Washington, you moved. Some people have to move. That sometimes the background change helps, but awful lot of our concepts and ideas have also changed over the years. And so both of those have to change, and you have to do whatever it takes to facilitate those. And if somebody holds your hand crossing the street, that's all the better, right? So nice to have someone to help you in that process.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's a good example and kind of sad. Of course, that's my judgment on the story that you shared about the overweight man. that you did offer him. And then I guess you could take it further and say, well, what would have happened if he had done what you suggested and then became addicted to you, that every time he would get up, his weight up, that you would be his marker for coming and sitting with him. But then you would have shown him something in the middle. But it's
I would have started charging him. That would have stopped him.
Yeah, my God, that's what we have to do. Wow.
$2,000 for 3 weeks. He would have said, "No, forget it." But he pays $1,000 a month to be on these diet plans, right?
Oh goodness.
And it's like you look at that and you go, "Really?" And they don't work.
Yeah.
So it's like, wow. It's very, very sad. I don't know how our time's going to go for recording this, but
don't know. Well, I'm not even keeping an eye on the time. Do you have a time limit? I didn't even ask you that. We weren't planning to
no, I have no time limit, but my pro account only gives me an hour.
Oh, does it? How rude of it.
It'll record it longer, but I can't upload it for more than an hour.
Okay.
So,
all right. So
how then I'd have to edit it. I mean, I can edit it. That's not a problem too. But anyway, it's just like, so it's just been fun. And so most certainly if you can get this all up there, put it all up, right?
Yeah, definitely. Well, listen, I am so grateful to spend time with you. I'm so grateful to share you with people. Like I said, I've mentioned you many times in different broadcasts, and you've been an amazing mentor to me, and you really do help people stretch the mind, like open up their perspective, their perception. You're here to rattle people's cages a little bit. You've done that remarkably well over the years. Are you still doing private one-to-one sessions? Can people come to you? Can they find you?
Well, I'm a little hard to get hold of. Me? Yeah. So I send everybody to people like you that are profound teachers and do a phenomenal job and are working in it. But I most certainly, if people email me, then I most certainly will respond to them. I have people all the time that call me, and I usually refer them to somebody somewhere. And I do have some people that I'm working with that are going to be 2 or 3 years. So they come through whatever they're going through. Really a tragedy. And so those people I kind of hang on to, because I realize if I turn them over to someone else, it's going to cost them a lot of money. It's going to take a long time. And people get disenchanted sometimes in that process. But for the most part, that's kind of where I sit. So Chris at wizardscache.com will get my email address. And that's wizardscache is WIZARDSCACHE. And that came together not because I'm a wizard, but because when I started a computer program originally, or a storage for blogs, when I was doing talks, I would record them and I had a place to store them, right? And so a wizard is a template in computer language, and a blog and a cache is a storage place. So Wizards Cache is a storage place for templates. And so that's what Wizards Cache meant. And so it was just a storage place. I originally typed it in as the name of it because I couldn't think of a name of it. So I did that because I was creating that website. I do websites, and so I was creating that website, and I just had that on it, and everybody was looking on it, and they said, "Oh, we love the name you put on it." And I'm thinking, that wasn't the name I put on it. That was just a storage cache, right? That was what that was, right?
Funny.
And so I just left it, right? It was like, and I abandoned it. So that's how I got there. But it's it's Chris with 2 S's, CHRISS. It's my first wife always called me an ass, so I just thought I'd save the extra S. So that I could have learned from the experience. Does that make sense? And so anyway.
But I'll make sure the details are underneath the video anywhere on YouTube. And
okay.
Again, thank you so much. Love you so much. I'm so grateful that you.
It's been really, really fun, and I will be talking to you again. Well, maybe we'll do it again this year. So we'll see what materializes.
Definitely, definitely.
Okay.